The fallen soldier. Commander Jackson Reed stared at the endless expanse of sand stretching before him, his vision blurring from dehydration. The twin sons of Altaris IV beat down mercilessly, turning his military-grade armor into an oven. Blood seeped through his makeshift bandage, the wound in his abdomen a constant reminder of the ambush that had decimated his unit just hours ago. They were gone, all of them, Specialists Torres and Donahue, Lieutenant Way, even young Private Franklin, barely 19 and on his first deployment. Their bodies lay scattered across the battlefield, broken and silent beneath the alien sky. Jackson dragged himself forward, each movement igniting fresh waves of agony. His communications unit had been damaged in the attack, leaving only static and the occasional burst of unintelligible chatter. Help wasn't coming. Command likely believed all personnel lost in action. "Not dying here," he muttered through cracked lips. "Not like this." The twisted hull of a downed transport ship loomed ahead, its metal skin peeled open by heavy artillery fire. It wasn't much, but it offered shelter from the relentless suns. Jackson crawled toward it, leaving a dark trail in the sand behind him. He squeezed through a jagged tear in the hull, fresh cuts forming on his arms as the metal edges sliced through his uniform. Inside, the air was stifling, thick with the smell of burned circuitry and fuel. Jackson wedged himself beneath a console, trying to control his ragged breathing. Outside, the distinctive whine of patrol vehicles cut through the desert silence. Jackson froze. The coalition forces that had ambushed his unit must be sweeping the area, eliminating survivors and collecting intelligence from the dead. "Check the wreckage," a voice barked. "Command wants all bodies identified and tagged." Jackson's hand moved to his holster, empty. His sidearm had been lost in the chaos of the ambush. Sweat trickled into his eyes as he pressed himself deeper into his hiding place. The footsteps drew closer, sand crunching beneath heavy boots. This was it. He was surrounded, unarmed, and too weak to fight. The adrenaline that had kept him moving was fading, leaving only pain and the certainty of capture, or worse. Jackson closed his eyes, thinking of his brother back home, of the vital information stored in the data chip concealed in his uniform. The coordinates for civilian evacuation points that could save thousands. A shadow fell across the opening, but the expected shout of discovery never came. Instead, Jackson became aware of movement from deeper within the wreckage, silent, controlled movement that seemed impossible in the debris-filled space. From behind a collapsed bulkhead emerged a figure moving with predatory grace. As it stepped into a shaft of light filtering through the broken hull, Jackson saw it was a woman, but unlike any he had ever encountered. Her skin was a deep cobalt blue, stretched over sharp, angular features. She wore mismatched armor pieces salvaged from different military units, and strapped to her back was a curved blade that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light. She walked straight through the haze of dust toward him, silent as a ghost, unconcerned about the patrol outside. Her eyes solid black without pupil or iris, locked with his. There was no compassion there, no warmth, only calculation. The blue-skinned woman stopped beside him and looked down, a scornful expression crossing her face. "Get up, human," she said, her voice low and harsh. "Only fools die in metal coffins." Jackson stared at her, recognition filtering through his pain-addled mind. He knew her, or rather knew of her kind. The Tyrolians, a race from the outer systems, fierce warriors with distinctive blue skin. This one had been taken prisoner during the Federation's push into Coalition territory 3 months ago. "You," he managed, his voice a dry rasp, "you're a prisoner." Her mouth curved into something between a smile and a snarl, revealing teeth too sharp to be human. "Was a prisoner. Now I'm your unlikely salvation. Ironic, isn't it?" She glanced toward the opening where voices grew louder as the patrol approached. "They'll search this wreck soon. Either move or die. Your choice." "Why?" Jackson asked, struggling to understand why an enemy combatant would risk herself for him. She knelt beside him, her face inches from his. "I have my reasons, you're a means to an end." Her hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. "You know the patrol patterns, I need a guide." With a sharp tug, she pulled him from his hiding place. Pain lanced through his side and he bit back a cry. She slipped her shoulder under his arm, supporting him as they moved toward a narrow maintenance shaft he hadn't noticed. They squeezed through the opening and emerged from the rear of the wreckage, into a blind spot where the patrol couldn't see them. "If you slow me down," she whispered, "I will leave you to the scavengers." Together they set off across the barren landscape, keeping low and using scattered debris for cover. The woman, who refused to give her name, walked ahead, her movements efficient and wary. Her sword was their only protection, and she made it clear that if a fight broke out, he'd better stay back or die. She wasn't going to risk herself for him beyond what served her purpose. As they walked, Jackson studied her. Under the double suns, her blue skin shimmered with an iridescent quality. The armor she wore had been modified, stripped of insignias and reinforced with scraps of metal and ceramic. Around her neck hung a pendant made of dark metal, engraved with symbols he didn't recognize. Occasionally, her fingers would brush against it as though drawing strength from its presence. "What's your name?" he asked as they paused in the shadow of a fallen communications tower. She didn't answer, just handed him a canteen of water. The liquid was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most precious thing he'd ever drunk. As she took back the canteen, the pendant swung forward. She quickly tucked it back beneath her armor. "You should conserve your strength rather than waste it on questions," she finally said. They continued moving as the suns began their slow descent, casting long shadows across the wasteland. By nightfall, they had covered several miles, putting distance between themselves and the patrol. They made camp in the lee of a rock formation, the woman building a small, smokeless fire using chemicals from a pouch at her hip. Jackson leaned against the rock, his wounds throbbing. The woman sat across from him, the fire casting strange shadows across her face. "Thank you," he said, "for saving me." She looked up, those black eyes reflecting the flames. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a long way to go." "Where are we going?" "Away from here. There's a neutral outpost 3 days' journey east. If we make it there, we might find transport off-world." Jackson nodded. It was as good a plan as any, better than waiting to die in the wreckage. "I'm Jackson," he offered, "Jackson Reed." The woman regarded him silently for a long moment, then turned away, her attention focused on cleaning her blade. "Get some rest, Jackson Reed. Tomorrow will be harder." On the third day, they wandered into a forgotten minefield. The markers had long since been buried by shifting sands, and it was only the woman's keen eyes that spotted the telltale disturbance in the ground pattern. "Stop," she commanded, throwing out an arm to halt Jackson. "Look at the sand. See how it forms those slight ridges. That's not natural." Jackson stared at the ground, seeing what she meant. The heat haze shimmering above the sand made it hard to focus, but there was indeed a subtle pattern to the terrain ahead, too regular to be formed by wind alone. "Mines," he muttered. "Old ones, probably from the first wave." The woman nodded. "We'll have to go around." They altered their course, adding hours to their journey. The detour took them across even more exposed terrain, and the merciless suns beat down upon them. Jackson's wounds had begun to fester despite the woman's rough attempts at treatment. Fever gripped him, making the world swim before his eyes. He collapsed in mid-stride, his legs simply giving out beneath him. The sand burned against his cheek as he lay there, unable to rise. "Get up," the woman's voice came from above him. When he didn't respond, she knelt beside him, her cool hand pressing against his forehead. "You're burning up," she said, her tone flat. Through the haze of fever, Jackson felt himself being dragged across the sand. He drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the woman's grip on his uniform and the scrape of his body over rough terrain. Then the howling winds came. The sandstorm hit without warning, the sky turning from blue to sickly yellow to brown as massive clouds of dust rolled toward them. In moments, they were engulfed in choking dust, visibility dropping to mere feet. "Stay close," the woman shouted, her voice barely audible above the screaming wind. But in the next instant she was gone, a blue shadow swallowed by the storm. Jackson stumbled forward, trying to maintain his direction, but the world had become a swirling nightmare of sand and wind. His foot caught on something hidden beneath the surface, and he pitched forward. There was a moment of weightlessness, and then he was falling, tumbling down a slope he hadn't seen. Pain exploded in his leg as it struck something solid. He screamed, the sound swallowed by the storm. When the world finally went black, Jackson Reed was alone, injured, and lost in an alien wasteland, separated from the mysterious woman who had refused to let him die. The unexpected alliance. Consciousness returned to Jackson slowly, each heartbeat pulsing pain through his broken leg. The storm had passed, leaving the desert unnaturally silent. Stars glittered coldly in the night sky above, visible through the thin layer of dust that still hung in the air. He lay at the bottom of a steep embankment, partially sheltered by an overhanging ridge. Jackson tried to move and gasped as fresh agony shot through his leg. The limb was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. His fever still burned, though the cool night air provided some relief. Still alive, impressive for a human. The voice came from above him. Jackson looked up to see a familiar blue silhouette perched on the edge of the embankment, silhouetted against the starry sky. Relief flooded through him, so intense it nearly brought tears to his eyes. "You came back," he said, his voice rough from thirst and dust. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, descended the slope with cat-like grace, her movements precise even in the darkness. Up close, he could see that she was covered in sand, her blue skin almost completely obscured by a layer of dust. "I almost didn't," she said, kneeling beside him. "The storm separated us. I made it to higher ground and waited it out. When it passed, I started tracking you." She glanced at his leg, her expression grim in the starlight. "You fell." "Broke my leg," Jackson confirmed. "I can't walk." She wiped sand from her face with the back of her hand, considering their options. Then, without warning, she reached for his injured limb. "This will hurt," she warned, and before he could prepare himself, she pulled the broken leg straight. Jackson's scream echoed across the ridge. The pain was blinding, all-consuming. For a moment, the world went white. When he came back to himself, the woman was tearing strips from her own clothing, fashioning a crude splint using pieces of debris gathered from around them. "Why did you come back for me?" he asked through gritted teeth. The woman didn't look up from her work. "We made a pact," she said simply. "My people honor their promises." Her hand stilled, hovering over his splinted leg. There was a long silence before she spoke again, her voice so low he almost didn't hear it. "My name is Nyxara," she said, "Nyx to those who knew me." Jackson nodded, understanding the significance of this small offering of trust. "Thank you, Nyx, for coming back for this." He gestured to his splinted leg. She resumed her bandaging, her movements more forceful now. "Next time, don't fall," she said, tightening the final bandage with a sharp tug. "It's hard to carry you with only one hand when the other's holding a sword." Despite the pain, Jackson found himself smiling. There was a certain dry humor in her words, a hint of the person beneath the warrior's exterior. "I'll try to remember that," he promised. At dawn, they continued their journey. Nyx fashioned a crude crutch for Jackson from debris, but progress was agonizingly slow. His broken leg dragged uselessly even with the splint. Nyx walked beside him, occasionally supporting him when the terrain became too difficult. By midday, they had covered barely a mile. "You should go on without me," Jackson said during one of their frequent rest stops. "I'm slowing you down too much." Nyx looked at him, her black eyes unreadable in the harsh sunlight. If I'd wanted to leave you behind, I wouldn't have come back for you in the storm." She rose to her feet, adjusting her sword harness. "Besides, I've grown somewhat used to your company. Be ashamed to break in a new human now." Before Jackson could respond, Nyx suddenly went still, her head cocked to one side like a predator sensing prey. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Jackson listened and heard it too, the soft crunch of boots on sand coming from the other side of the ridge. Not the heavy tread of military patrols, but something stealthier. Nyx drew her sword in one fluid motion, the blade gleaming dully in the sunlight. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice low and intense. She stepped forward, placing herself between Jackson and the approaching threat. From his position on the ground, Jackson could see three figures rounding the edge of the ridge. They wore mismatched armor like Nyx's, but with yellow bands tied around their upper arms, the mark of the Dust Vipers, a notorious mercenary group that scavenged battlefields and hunted survivors for bounty. The lead mercenary spotted them and raised a hand, halting his companions. His face was hidden behind a respirator mask, but his stance showed surprise and then recognition as he took in Nyx's blue skin. "Well, well," his voice was distorted by the mask. "Look what we found, a Tyrolian and her pet soldier." Nyx didn't respond, just adjusted her grip on her sword. "There's a nice bounty on both your heads," the mercenary continued. "The Federation wants their commander back," he nodded toward Jackson, "and the Coalition would pay handsomely for a Tyrolian prisoner, especially one who's killed as many of their officers as you have." "You won't collect either bounty today," Nyx said calmly. The mercenary laughed, the sound hollow behind his mask. "3 against 1, blue girl, and your friend there doesn't look like he'll be much help." "3 against 1, Nyx agreed. "Hardly seems fair. Perhaps you should call for reinforcements." And then the dance began. Before the mercenaries could react, Nyx was moving, her sword a blur of motion. She struck fast, silent, lethal, straight at the leader. The blade found the gap between his chest plate and shoulder guard, sinking deep. He didn't even have time to scream. The other two mercenaries recovered from their shock, drawing their own weapons, a vibroblade and a compact pulse rifle. Nyx was already moving, spinning away from the first mercenary as his body crumpled. The one with the rifle got off a single shot that went wide, and then Nyx was on him. Her fighting style was unlike anything Jackson had ever seen, not the disciplined, standardized techniques taught in Federation academies, nor the brute force approach favored by Coalition troops. This was something else entirely, fluid, adaptive, almost beautiful in its deadly precision. The second mercenary fell, his throat opened by a reverse stroke of Nyx's blade. The third, seeing his companions dispatched so quickly, turned to flee. He made it 3 steps before Nyx's sword took him in the back, piercing through armor and spine with terrible efficiency. When it was over, the sand drank blood, turning dark red then black under the merciless suns. Nyx stood among the bodies, her chest heaving slightly with exertion, her sword dripping crimson. Jackson stared, both awed and unnerved by what he had witnessed. He had seen combat, had killed his share of enemies, but nothing like this cold, efficient slaughter. He struggled to his feet, using his makeshift crutch for support, and stepped closer. Nyx didn't turn, still focused on the bodies at her feet, checking that they were truly dead. "Who are you?" Jackson asked, his voice hushed. "Really?" Nyx finally looked at him, wiping her blade clean on one of the mercenaries' cloaks. There was blood spattered across her blue skin, already drying to a rust color in the heat. "The one your kind hunts," she said simply. "The last of my clan." She sheathed her sword and began searching the bodies, collecting anything useful: water, ammunition, medical supplies. Jackson stood silent, understanding that he had just glimpsed something few ever saw, a Tyrolian warrior in their element. No wonder both sides sought to capture or kill them. "We should move," Nix said, straightening up with her scavenged supplies. "Where there are 3 mercenaries, there will be more. They hunt in packs." By nightfall, they had found shelter, a cave carved into the base of a larger ridge, partially hidden by fallen rock. Inside, they discovered the remains of an old reconnaissance outpost, half-collapsed but still offering protection from the elements. Power still flickered through some of the abandoned systems. A communications unit hummed with static, its broadcast range too limited to be useful. Jackson examined the outpost systems, seeing if anything could be salvaged. His technical training proved useful as he managed to coax some life from the emergency lighting, casting the cave in a soft blue glow. "Water recycler still functioning," he called to Nix. "We can refill our canteens here." Nix nodded, setting down her pack and removing her sword harness with a weary sigh. For the first time since they'd begun their journey, she allowed herself to show fatigue. She sank down against one wall, stretching her legs out before her. "How's the leg?" she asked, nodding toward Jackson's splinted limb. "Still broken," he replied with a wry smile, "but the pain's manageable. Your field medicine skills are impressive." "Necessity," she said simply. "When you live on the edge of survival, you learn quickly or die." They sat in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The only sound was the soft hum of the few functioning systems and the whisper of wind outside their shelter. "I have a brother," Jackson said suddenly, "back home, Marcus. He's the reason I'm out here. He's intelligence, specializes in civilian evacuation operations. The data chip I'm carrying contains the coordinates for safe extraction points for thousands of refugees." His hand instinctively went to the hidden pocket in his uniform. "He trusted me to get this information through, made me promise I wouldn't die out here." Nix looked at him, her expression curious. "What do you believe in, Jackson Reed?" It was a question he had asked himself many times over the years of conflict. "I believed in duty," he said slowly, "in protecting the innocent. My brother always said this war was wrong, but he still fights his way by saving those caught in the middle. This mission is his life's work, and now it's mine too." He looked away. "Every day we delay, more civilians die waiting for evacuation that never comes." Nix's hand went to the pendant around her neck, her fingers tracing the symbols engraved there. "This was my mother's," she said unexpectedly. "She was a keeper of histories for our clan. When the Federation first came to our world, she advocated for peace." A bitter smile crossed her face. "They killed her first." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Jackson felt a knot form in his stomach. He had been part of the forces that invaded her world, believing they were bringing order to chaos, protection to the oppressed. How many keepers of histories had died beneath Federation boots? "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "You weren't there," Nix replied, though there was no absolution in her tone. "But you are part of the machine that was." "And now," Jackson asked, "what do you fight for now?" Nix was silent for a long moment, her black eyes reflecting the blue emergency lights. "Survival," she finally said. "My own and maybe something more. There are others like me, scattered, hiding. The pendant also contains coordinates, safe havens for my people, places your Federation doesn't know about." Understanding dawned on Jackson. "That's why you saved me. You recognized my uniform, knew I might have access to patrol routes, security codes." "Initially, yes," Nix admitted. "But then you surprised me. You didn't try to capture me when you realized who I was. You shared your water, your story." She shrugged. "Maybe I wanted to see if there could be something better than just killing each other." As morning approached, they prepared to leave the temporary sanctuary of the cave. The neutral outpost was less than a day's journey away now, if they could make it there without encountering more mercenaries or military patrols. Jackson checked his splint one last time and tested his weight on the improved crutch Nix had fashioned from outpost materials. His fever had broken during the night. thanks to antibiotics found in the mercenaries' medical supplies. "Ready?" Nix asked, adjusting her sword harness. Jackson nodded, "As I'll ever be." Before they stepped out into the harsh sunlight, Nix paused, turning to face him. "If we reach the outpost, we'll likely go our separate ways. You to your Federation, me to my people." "It doesn't have to be that way," Jackson said. "The information I carry, the evacuation coordinates, they could help your people too. My brother would ensure it." Nix studied him, her expression unreadable. "Why would you do that?" "Because this war has gone on long enough," Jackson replied. "And because you refuse to let me die, even when it would have been easier." A ghost of a smile crossed Nix's face. "Strange allies we've become," Jackson read. "The strangest," he agreed. As they stepped out into the unforgiving desert, Jackson realized that something fundamental had changed. The mission remained the same: get the evacuation coordinates to safety, but its purpose had expanded. No longer was it just about Federation civilians. Now it included the scattered survivors of Nix's people as well. Two enemies had become unlikely allies, and in that alliance, a small spark of hope had ignited. Hope that perhaps there could be an end to the cycle of violence that had consumed both their worlds. Together, they walked toward the horizon, toward an uncertain future that somehow seemed brighter than before.